Please listen carefully.
Welcome to the Retail Conversations podcast. This is Morten Max. Okay, just a quick update here. Personally, it is very much still a steep learning process for me doing this concept, producing these episodes, and also just experimenting with the format. And I have to say, I find myself very engulfed and very inspired with a strong sense of purpose with our project here. I guess that is a good thing. Some new conversations are lined up and will soon be getting out to the world. I will share more about that in the next episode. Today, I will be speaking with Gary Wise. Gary is a unique learning and development capacity in my humble opinion. He has more than 35 years to his belt, working in learning and development in various industries, including retail, and with various leading roles and responsibilities. In his current role, he is a senior manager of learning and development at Macy's. And I owe Gary a small apology here. In my introduction episode, I said that Gary has more than 20 years of experience. Well, it's a little bit more than that, Gary. So, sorry. This was my second conversation on Skype, and what an interesting one it was, as well as a very educational one for myself, I have to say. I have been a supporter and a fan of Gary's work, especially if you read his blog on livinginlearning.com for some time now, and his work is very inspiring. So you won't find me talking a lot in this conversation either, which is a good thing, of course, since we're doing this podcast to give voice to the people we are fortunate enough to have a conversation with. In our talk, we cover various very concrete business cases and experiences that I believe is of interest to all retailers. Especially, there is a shout out to all of us who focus a lot of our efforts into training staff in our daily work. His work around the performance paradigm is, in my opinion, truly timely, extremely relevant and valuable for all of us. And now, without holding the queue any longer, I hereby give you Gary Wise. Hi, Gary. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thanks, Morten. I appreciate the invitation. Looking forward to it.
Well, I must say, Gary, I've been looking also very much forward to this conversation we're going to have, and just to make sure our listeners are on board here, we've never met. And this is our first real ever conversation, if you'd like, even though we have been connected on LinkedIn for some months now, right?
Right. I think our only real live conversation prior to this was just a test to make sure that Skype was working.
Exactly. Exactly. And actually, I initially stumbled upon a post of yours. I believe it was called like "Survey Says Enough with the E-Learning Already." And yeah, and I remember it. To be honest with you, it had a much greater and more important impact on me than you could actually imagine. Because being an independent retail consultancy here on my own, using some very basic principles as my building blocks, it was when I read that post of yours, it kind of like gave me even more confidence in the timing and the match I have between what I believe in retail and what the world, maybe where the world of retail is, or the world of learning and development, I should say. So thank you for giving me that boost in confidence at that time in my life.
Well, thank you for validating something I've written. At least there's one person out there who's reading it. Great.
Yeah, but then of course it made me read some of the other things you have shared to the world, and for anyone listening, I can really strongly recommend digging into Gary's work and where he shares his insights on livinginlearning.com. It's an amazing read, and of course I would always say that when I agree with the points and and the convictions in that.
But I have to say, Gary, your angle with the performance paradigm and also the point of work is really spot on to where I think we should go with learning and development today. So I'm really very much looking forward to our conversation.
Well, great. I couldn't agree with you more, despite the fact that I am the author of all of those things. It's been an interesting journey in the realm of learning and development for me. It's funny, you know, I've been in the business for over 35 years, and I look back on it and have spoken at a lot of learning and development conferences here in the U.S. E-Learning Guild, Learning Solutions, Elliott Maisy, and I usually start the conversation with, I used to be 6'5" and have a full head of hair, and now I'm 6 feet and not so much hair, and that's mainly due to friction. And the friction I refer to is the 35 plus year journey in learning and development, where I would look at the first 24 as a learning experience and a situation where I think what I mainly created was an amazing string of failures. And not failures in the sense of poor training or poor direction to the teams that I led, or poor selections of learning technology that have been acquired over different positions. But the fact that what I did not succeed in doing was sustaining workforce capability. And workforce capability is results. It's performance results. And that happens at the point of work. Point of work being that place where individuals make decisions, take action, plug in a data field in an SAP procurement module, or have a crucial conversation with a subordinate. I mean, anywhere someone has to take action and perform some sort of task level work is the point of work. And a lot of people talk about moment of need and just in time and those things. But I go to the physical situation where somebody is in a workflow or at their respective point of work, and recognize, are they going to be successful? Are they consistently successful? And are their capabilities sustained? And that's kind of what has shaped my journey in learning and development. And I would say of the 35 years, it's been the last 15 where that has really been a point of focus. And the blog, I've been blogging since 2009, and most all of the postings in the blog are all focused on this concept of point of work and a learning continuum, and the concept of a learning and performance ecosystem, and all the jargon and buzzwords that are so popular these days. But it's been an interesting journey to say the least, and that's been the source of the friction, is trying to break that paradigm from training to a paradigm based on performance.
Very interesting, and I also already now I know we could talk for a long time about the world of learning and development, and I know this conversation will be hopefully one of more, I would say, and also in terms of I'm sure that it will be a great education for me just to listen to your experience, also how I should how do you say that, look at my future and predict when I get to know hair and a little bit lower in height. So I'm looking for some education thoughts and some experience on that. But basically, you've opened up the topic very well. For our listeners here and also for myself, please give us a little bit of insight, Gary, into more in detail has your journey been these last many years in your career, and the journey to where you are now, if that's okay. I know that I saw on LinkedIn that you call yourself a human performance strategist. But I don't know how you would frame it with the sentences you would need for that.
Okay. Well, my background, I think, is very cross-industry. I think is probably a good way to describe it. I had 11 years in retail, from retail grocery to department store to merchandise buyer to store management, all through the ranks. Um, Through college and graduating from college, I wound up uh, in the retail industry. I got an undergraduate degree in business administration, uh, focusing on the degree program for marketing. Um, After I decided that working for minimum wage, when I started looking at the number of hours that I worked each week as a store manager and the pay that I was getting, I decided there had to be a better way to make money, and I wound up in the telecom industry um, and spent 22 years in telecom. Most of that was in learning and development and training, sales training particularly. Um, and I became a road warrior. I had more Marriott points and Platinum American Airline points than I could actually spend, um, being in that role where I was gone 36 weeks out of 52 each year. Um, that was not. It was probably the best time I've had because I love being in front of a group and delivering training or speaking at a conference. But the wear and tear of always living out of a suitcase was the downside to that. But got out of telecom after so long when the company I was with decided to file for Chapter 11. And I found myself on the street going, wow, what do I do now? All I have is telecom background, and wound up in the medical equipment field. And it turns out that what made me portable uh, outside of the telecom industry was getting the skill set of a performance consultant. And of all the things that have happened over the 30 some years that I've been in learning and development, the absolute smartest thing I did was pursue the certification for human performance improvement through at that time ASTD. And that was a program. Human performance improvement was a certification program for HPI, and it predated the CPLP certification that is out there now. But that is, I think, what made me portable. And I went from telecom into medical equipment manufacturing with Roche Diagnostics, headquartered in your neck of the woods, and knew absolutely nothing about medical equipment. But I was hired because of the performance consulting skill set, was hired as director of sales training. And that was a significant shift because I think that's where it finally dawned on me that my value wasn't all of the previous learning and development experience that I had, but it was this concept of performance consulting and being able to go into a situation where there was a performance issue and figure out what the problem was and why it existed, and who was involved and what were the workflow processes and what content was consumed and resources were consumed at the point of work, and what technology did they interface with, what business applications, and this even predated mobile technology to a certain extent. And how did measurement actually take place of business impact? Because to that point, the only measurements that were taken were level 1 and level 2 course evaluations. And, it doesn't do you that much good in terms of examining, did you make any lasting or sustainable impact to the workforce, if all you have is smile sheets that say, yeah, we loved the course, the pace was good, loved the instructor, loved the chicken tacos, and yes, I passed the final exam. All that really proved is activity in the learning and development department. And all it really promised was the potential of results because nobody's actually done anything yet. And what I found exciting was I want to go to the point of work. And that's kind of where that phrase came from. I want to go to ground zero and see where they're digging the hole and how they're doing. Are there problems getting in the way with the dig? And what are those problems? What are contributing to those problems? And what is the most appropriate asset or solution that I could employ to close the performance gap? And oftentimes, what I found was it wasn't training. It might have been a laminated card hanging around someone's neck with color codes on it describing a code that's going off in the hospital, or it's a situation where it's a downloadable document that I can get to a mobile phone at the moment of need. The point being, at the point of work, the point of learning has passed, but there's nothing wrong with building learning into the workflow. And that's what has me so excited about this concept of point of work is there are opportunities to learn within the workflow. And that's kind of at the core of the 70-20-10 model that Charles Jennings put together. This whole concept of point of work to me is definitely ground zero. And that's where the focus needs to be for learning and development. And that's a significant shift from a training paradigm that focuses on the myth that training drives performance and then recognizing, wow, it only really drives potential. If you want performance, you have to go to the point of work where performance actually takes place and results are manifest. And that's where I think the ability to look through a lens as a performance consultant and see what's keeping that from happening and or why is it not optimized to be able to make some decisions as to, so what do we do to make this better?
It sounds like that you said that this certification you took or an upgrade in your competence at that point when you made that shift, you could say, it sounds like the role has been like, if I should flip it into another term, like a mix of a lean consultant mixed with a Six Sigma expert, mixed with a that goes in and looks at the point of work from a 360 perspective, right?
Yes. I mean, a pure play performance consultant is looking at a number of things and making recommendations based upon what's causing the performance gap. If it's a compensation issue, then a pure play performance consultant would make recommendations on what a compensation program adjustment might look like. I had the benefit and the blessing, if you will, to be in the learning and development field for so long that my focus was, what is the learning and development solution contribution to the performance gap? And in the event where it might not be a learning and development solution, to be able to have the collaborative approach to work with the Six Sigma team, or to work with the HR generalist or the compensation people to come up with the findings that came out of my discovery. And I think that's the key skill set that an individual in learning and development should have, or the learning and development team rather, should have someone with those skills to be on the front end of any operation that looks like it might be a request. As opposed to being an order taker, we need to be in a position to be able to take a request and confirm, yes, we can help with this training request, but let me ask you a few questions first. And that's when the role of a performance consultant would kick in, a learning and development performance consultant. And in the case of the role that I say that I have as a human performance strategist, I'm strategizing on what it's going to take to close the performance gaps at the point of work. If that's training, that's fine. If it's training and performance support, that's fine. If it's just performance support, or if it's something that is a broken workflow and the Six Sigma folks are going to have to figure it out, The idea is I'm coming in there and not defaulting to the myth that training is going to fix the performance, and focus on actually what's causing it. And what gives that so much emphasis at this point is our stakeholders believe that paradigm that training drives performance, because we, meaning learning and development, have done such an outstanding job of selling that to people for years and years. And I'm as guilty as anyone for being a cheerleader for training drives performance. But it doesn't. It drives potential. Now, it contributes to performance. There's no question about that. But when you look at knowledge retention loss and those kinds of things that degrade the ability to remember the knowledge and skills that were transferred to you long enough to actually apply them at the point of work, that's where we have a disconnect. And what happens when we have a disconnect? Somebody makes a mistake. They make a wrong decision. And that directly ties to business value being lost or not optimized, or business liability or material waste being created. I mean, there's a number of things. You can fill in the blank there, that if you make mistakes at the point of work, that's where it matters. Making mistakes in a classroom are not a problem, and that's where you should make them. But there's a whole different ball game when people graduate from learning events and go to the point of work to actually function. And that's where I think learning and development is missing in action for the most part.
You make me think of a quite an interesting angle, at least in my experience of working with retail for 22 years, is that sometimes when I work with some of my clients, or actually I would not consider myself either at the level but doing exactly what you're doing, but let's say they really are interested in doing a sales or service training program with me, and they want me to be the supplier for this. And then when we go in and investigate and dig a little bit deeper, we kind of find out that the problem is not their sales and service training. Their problem is actually, when they look at the operational side of their daily routines, is that they are not ready to open the store at the right time, and actually they are not ready mentally to welcome the customer. So sometimes we actually figure out that the problem is not the training they wanted, it's actually a focus on their operational duties or their productivity in their task, so they can actually be mentally prepared, if you say, or mentally ready for the consumer, which sometimes actually creates even bigger results than they initially hoped for.
Oh, that's an excellent example that just triggered something in my mind. I'll share with you. We just did a project, got a request from the talent and acquisition group to improve interviewing skills training, because they were having some concerns with the high volume of seasonal hiring that had to happen of hourly employees. They needed to be more effective and more efficient with interviewing. And we did the discovery, interviewed individuals, store managers, human resource managers, the training resources that had been used, and looked at the existing training curriculum that existed. And we didn't really have a gap in training. We found that the gap was in awareness. The whole concept around a 15-minute interview is, it depends on which side of the table you're on. If you are the interviewer, you have 11 interviews back to back. They're 15 minutes long, and it's go, go, go. If you're on the other side of the table, you are a candidate, and that 15 minutes is probably the most important 15 minutes of your day. There was a huge disconnect there on how we were showing up for the interview. We weren't necessarily creating the friendly, comfortable environment and experience for the candidate, in such a way that that candidate's probably a customer, not just a candidate. So it was this whole concept of, wow, we don't really have a tactical performance situation. We've got a mindset, a self-awareness component that is amiss. And a lot of what we wound up doing wasn't really creating new training. It was creating things around self-awareness and being engaged with active listening and some of the softer HR type skills that you would think of to be part of the solution. And we moved it to the portal to where it could be accessible at the moment of need. And it wasn't a course. It was a collection of experience-related components and best practice videos of what an interview should look like if those kinds of things are done to create an environment and an experience, a positive experience. That's an example of, the performance consulting isn't necessarily, which button to push in SAP. It can be something as soft as a human skill. In terms of how you relate to other people and interpersonal relationships. So it's interesting. Every opportunity to do a discovery comes up with something a little bit different.
That's one of the magics of the cosmos. So where has the journey brought you to at the moment, these last few years and in your career?
Well, right now I'm focusing in my current job and in the coaching capabilities that I have to really focus on the concept of the discovery behind this whole concept of the performance paradigm. As a performance consultant, I look at myself as, that's my key contribution to this. I've done instructional design, but I have proven I am not an instructional designer. I have developed content using Lectora and Articulate, but I have confirmed that I am not a developer in Lectora or Articulate. My sweet spot, if you will, is the ability to do the discovery and then translate that to those people who are in fact instructional designers and competent developers to be able to turn the discovery around performance into the most appropriate blend of assets to make an impact. So my focus is building, I've actually built a template around the concept of the performance paradigm in terms of that first critical discovery, where you're sitting down with a stakeholder and answering that question, answering that request where they've said, we need training on X, and my response is, okay, I can help with that, but let me ask you a few questions first, and then dig into the organization at the end user level and at other levels where it's appropriate to do so, to dig into 5 basic areas that you look at each level a little bit differently. At the senior level, I want to know who's the audience, who is the target audience that I'm after. That's the people component. And the people component is comprised of the actual end user, the worker, the performer, if you will, and who supports the performer. So I want to know, are there mentors in place? Is the supervisor, direct supervisor, in a role to support and to reinforce? Are there reinforcement or support resources like a help desk that are involved? And potentially even, is there a customer component to this? Who are the people impacted by the performance gaps that you're experiencing? And not really talking about the performance at this point, just who are the players? Who are the people that are hands-on, that are touching or being touched in order to make the performance happen? The second piece is process. And that's where I'm looking at the workflow. What's broken? Where is it broken? When does it break? Where in the workflow does the breakdown take place? And what I'm after here is task level evidence of where performance is deficient, and looking and digging for what are the root causes for that. And that's very, very tactical workflow, Visio intensive. I mean, I want to map out workflows to see what are decision points, where things break down, how many steps are there in a transaction, that kind of thing. The third piece is content. And content refers to information and resources that are used in the course of the work. Is there a database that you interrogate to get information? Is there a knowledge base that you use? Is there a binder of documents that you have to interrogate to get the work done? Is there some sort of electronic device that you use to get to the information? Is it in SharePoint someplace? So I'm looking for content that is used in the process of the workflow, but also content that is used to train people to do the job. So I'm looking at legacy training content, just as we did in that interviewing exercise. I wanted to see what are they being trained with now to evaluate the effectiveness of the content. The fourth component is technology. And that's technology from a perspective of end user technology. What mobile devices are you attached to or are attached to you? Do you sit down at a desktop computer? Or are you chained in a cubicle someplace and you spend your day on SAP or Oracle? What are the business applications? Are you a customer service agent that is interfacing with a client service management situation, CRM? Are you a healthcare worker and you're interfacing with electronic medical record system? I mean, what is the enterprise technology that you use to get the job done? And I'm also looking at the technology where content is reposited. Is it SharePoint? Is there a knowledge base somewhere? Is this an intranet portal-based situation? What's behind the portal? And I'm looking at what are the analytics tools that are going to be involved in this as well. And that supports the fifth and final piece, which is measurement. How are you measuring impact? What are the key performance indicators, the KPIs that are currently being tracked? And what are the current benchmarks of, so what are the results today? What sort of impact are you experiencing today to get a sense of the rate of work or production or whatever the unit of measure may be? And then look at that from a perspective of, all right, if that's where you are today, where should it be? Where do you want it to be? And also looking at, are there measures that currently aren't being taken? Are we measuring the right thing? And when you start looking at what are we measuring and what could we be measuring, you have to consider another component of technology, and that's Experience API. That to me is probably one of the biggest breakthroughs that's happened in a long, long time, and I'm very excited about the Experience API and the prevalence now that's I think rapidly growing in some areas of learning record stores.
So for those of us who needs to be a little bit more sharper in what API means and what it consists of, how would you explain that concept?
I'll use an example of a learning management system where when you complete a course, it goes into your course history. And by using the SCORM capability in a learning management system, we can determine how long people took to get through a course. We can look at some components of usage inside the course. We look at testing scores. We look at interim scores, knowledge checks within a course, and final exam if it's an e-learning course. but all those results are stored in the learning management system. If you look at a call management system in a call center, in a contact center, statistics on a call center agent in terms of how long they spend on each call and how long a call is put on hold and how many calls are handled in an hour. Those kinds of statistics are stored within the contact management system. So each electronic system usually has some way to track utilization of the users that are using the system. A learning record store is a repository for data that is separate and apart from, and I'll use those two examples, the call management system and the learning management system, two disparate systems that do not talk to one another, yet each produces data on utilization. A learning record store basically becomes a repository that can interface with both systems and can cross-reference those data points using an API, an application protocol interface. The Experience API, which is a small x and a capital API, produce a linkage between the system and the repository where those data records are kept. And the data records are based upon a three-prong statement. The statement is actor, verb, object. An example of that would be Gary Wise completed course X. There's your actor, verb, object. Morten Max completed 3 calls this hour. Morten Max put this call on hold 6 times in the course of 1 call, and that data is kept. Now, think of the ramifications of being able to write a query into that learning management system and recognizing that Morten Max just completed new hire training for his agent position, and I'm tracking how many times Morten puts a call on hold when a best practice shows that should only go on hold 1 time and for no more than 30 seconds. But you've put the call on hold 6 times for 45 seconds each. Typically, if I'm just interrogating the call management system, I don't have visibility to that. Excuse me. I have visibility to the total amount of time a call is put on hold, but I don't know by whom. Now, the learning record store is giving me a bridge into the actual device, the business application, and I'm cross-referencing that with the fact that, hey, I trained you on how to do that, but something's wrong here. And it sends up a flag to where now I have the option of going to you and say, Morten, what seems to be the problem? You're putting calls on hold an excessive amount. Why is that? How can we help? Ordinarily, you wouldn't have that. You would have, there's been 36 hours of time that calls were on hold this week. There are 42 hours the previous week. Okay, so what? What intelligence, what actionable business intelligence is there with that? And that's what Experience API does, is it bridges between disparate systems that can tie performance and utilization to individuals to where I can now see how people are doing, and that's all reposited in the learning record store. That was a very long answer to a short question.
No. I think it's very valuable for those of us who listen to it and who might not have had the experience of working close to this and are understanding what it is. And I always love getting new angles on how to explain things. So thank you for that one.
I've done a lot of work in call center and contact centers since I've been in learning and development, and that is, to me, the sweet spot. The point of work there is the poor agent sitting at a workstation, handling call after call after call and being under the gun to perform in a very expedient manner on all the calls, and the complexity sometimes of what it takes in order to process a call. There's one example, if I can tell you a quick story. When I worked for Xerox Global Learning Services, we were in a call center, and it's 450 agents in the call center, and they were looking to find some way to reduce turnover in their positions. And these folks were retail call center agents. They were interfacing with customers with their credit cards and fulfilling orders and processing returns and exchanges and those types of things. And the turnover was extremely high, which is not necessarily an anomaly for that call center. That's pretty much discipline-wide. But the question is, why? Why is the turnover so high? And it turns out that it was agent frustration that was getting in the way. It wasn't the fact that it was poor training. It was the fact that the training was not the solution, and the training was not giving them what they needed at the point of work. They needed access to answers in the workflow, and in the CRM that they were using, the client relationship management system. If they left the system to go into the knowledge base, the system would time out. And there was a situation where they needed to be able to stay in the workflow, to be able to access the knowledge base and not disrupt the timer that was actually running in the background on the knowledge base. And it was a frustration issue. So the solution was performance support technology, where within the workflow, they could contextually access what they needed at the moment of need and not leave the workflow. And it dramatically reduced the amount of time for calls to take place, and it dramatically reduced the amount of time it actually took to train people, because the training was done using the technology. They were actually handling calls as part of their training, as opposed to looking at the theory and the concept of how that would work when I finally get a chance to do it. But the funny thing was, the indication that there was a problem was the methodology that they used to indicate an agent was having a problem, and that was hands in the air. If your hands in the air, that means your customer is on hold. And if it was a customer service issue, they probably weren't calling in a good humor to begin with, and now they're on hold, waiting for an agent to have a floor walker come over and answer a question. And there were so many hands in the air that the floor walker would not really provide any training. The floor walker would just do what needed to be done and then move to the next hand. So nothing was actually happening to improve the performance other than wearing out the floor walkers to handle hands in the air. So the indicator that there was an issue was hands in the air. And I actually have a blog post about it's in the hands that talks about that whole experience.
Interesting. So that's basically what we've been talking about the last 10 minutes or so. Is that this when we talk about the world of learning and development in your words, it's you have a focus and a concept of the performance paradigm. Would that be fair to say it like that?
Oh, absolutely.
With these 5 people, process, content, technology, and measurement as the 5 elements that you dig into.
That is the 5-phase discovery process that's at the core of the performance paradigm.
And how after you develop this, I think this is from my standing point, it's very simple, but yet I'm sure it's extremely impactful. So what is how do people receive it? when you go out and with a, let's say, a new company or a new contact and present this?
I have a story. I had a request from the Senior Vice President of Sales and Marketing to look at the marketing curriculum. We've got a problem with our curriculum. We need to improve the curriculum. And my response was, absolutely, I can help you with that. But let me ask you a few questions first. What's wrong with the curriculum in your mind? What needs to be fixed? What is it not doing? And his response was, we want to be a world-class marketing organization, and this curriculum is not getting us there. And I said, you're convinced it's the curriculum that's holding you back then? And he said, absolutely. Things are not happening that should be happening, and it's because people don't have the knowledge and the skills to actually do their job right. I said, all right, let me do some discovery with your team. I'd like your permission to talk to your directors and your line managers, and I'd like to talk to some individual contributors, both incumbents that have been here a while, as well as some new hires that have joined the company. And I had previously done a diagnostic assessment using this methodology for the sales organization, and that took 6 weeks because there was 6 regions and 36 best practice players were involved, and it was fairly extensive. And his response was, okay, you can do this, but I don't have time to do what you did for sales. He didn't have time because he's wrapped around the training paradigm axle. He's focused on training is going to drive performance. If I just fix the training, then he's going to have a world-class marketing organization. Thank you very much. It'll probably take a couple weeks to decide what different courses need to be in the curriculum, and we'll be good to go. So I did the discovery across the people, process, content, technology, and measurement piece. And the funny thing was, the results I put in the form of a pie chart. And this was a very unscientific study. I mean, all I did was ask the questions of these different work groups, and stroke counted the answers that I received, and I plugged them into, was this a people issue? Was this a process issue? Was this a content issue? And at that point in time, I had within the people category a subcategory called capability. And capability is where training resided. So I go through this process, and I look at this pie chart, and the 42% slice on this pie chart was process related. He had workflow issues. He had leadership issues. He had motivation issues. He had technology issues. And yes, there was a little sliver on capability. 18% of what could be fixed by training was training related. But when you look at that 18%, what about the other 82%? And I put that in the form of a pie chart, and there was no way I was going to get him off the dime on fixing this curriculum. That's all he was looking for. He wanted to see new courses, different courses. So my proposal to him was a single sheet of paper, and it was a pie chart, and it filled the page. It was as big as your hand on a single sheet of paper, and I laid it in front of him, and I reached over and circled the 18% that had to do with training, and I said, here's where training resides. Here's your marketing curriculum. And I didn't say anything else for just a few seconds. And he sort of sat back in his chair, and he looked at that pie chart, and then I saw the light come on in his eyes that, wow, maybe this isn't a training issue. And that was my question to him then was, I can help you. I can be 100% effective on 18% of your challenges. Where would you like me to start? Which of these areas would you like to start with? And his response was, I want them all. And of course he would, but when you take a look at 42% of his issues being process related, That was a Six Sigma intervention. He did not ask Six Sigma for help. He asked me for a new training curriculum. The performance paradigm and the people, process, content, technology, and measurement discovery process uncovered some other issues that needed to be addressed. He had some HR issues to handle leadership, and he had some operational issues in the Six Sigma organization to do a black belt intervention. Now, we got involved from a learning and development perspective because as processes change, obviously some training and support is going to change. But the whole concept was I could have taken an order for a new marketing curriculum and maybe done some discovery around what's the best competencies in marketing that we need to have, and are we actively pursuing the right competencies, and does the existing training address those appropriately? Trying to find some way to optimize the curriculum when only 18% of it was going to be optimized at the very best. So that to me is, and that's also a story on the blog called Confessions of a Performance Ninja that goes into the detail around that. But that was an example where the performance paradigm and being able to shift the mindset of the stakeholder from a training paradigm was done with a single sheet of paper and that pie chart.
It's a very solid case, and I would also say that with the risk of just repeating with other words what you've just explained, in my experience, I've many times encountered or had people with the positive intention of course becoming world class, as you say. We want to be the best in, and we want to achieve, and so on, and it had also been a list of 10 things they wanted to implement and change now. Can you please fix this? And it tends to be very, like you did with the pie chart here, based on a lot of research and insight, of course, first and foremost, but just popping the question sometimes saying, okay, based on these 8 things that we have on, or the 5 things we have on this pie chart right now, what would be the main driver, or what is the right X to start with? That has actually sometimes been a very valuable discussion or thought provoker to put on the table, actually. And also sometimes make them think about, even though they are interconnected, and when we change these workflow in your vocabulary, that would also require some training curriculum to be changed. But I know they're interrelated, but which one of these factors can we focus on to improve now, and that might even help us fix the other ones?
Exactly. And the funny thing was, he didn't have the time for me to do a full-blown diagnostic, but he did have the time for a black belt Six Sigma intervention. He did have time to do marketing values and attitudes survey in order to determine where were the competency gaps, in fact, if there were any. All of a sudden, the urgency really didn't go away, but the urgency to call something complete was totally obliterated by the fact that he's got more problems on his plate than he realized. And I think that's the job of a performance consultant, is to clearly lay out where the opportunities are and then build a partnering relationship with the stakeholder to prioritize. So where do we start? Because what was accomplished here, other than just, yes, he got a new marketing curriculum, there's no doubt, and there were some changes in the curriculum, but there were some other things that changed as well. But I think probably the most impactful change was the relationship between me as a director of sales training, as his performance consultant, and him in his leadership role, because now he viewed me as a business partner. I wasn't someone to call up and say, I need 10 pounds of selling skills training by Thursday. He would call me up from a perspective of, we have an opportunity here. I'd like to talk with you about that. There was no more orders given. It was more of, let's talk about this. Tell me what you think. And that's the kind of relationship that we really want to have. We want to have a first call relationship, I've often called it. If someone has a performance issue, we get the first call to come in and do the performance consulting piece to determine what needs to be done, what our contribution could be, and what else might be done in order to make a sustainable impact.
I know we've probably covered it somewhat when we've been talking about the performance paradigm, but in terms of the learning and development industry as such, where do you see their current form? I know that you would provoke them on their mindset of where are they? Are they in the training paradigm or are they in the performance paradigm? But where do you see the strength in learning and development at the moment and the form of that industry?
I think on an average, and this is opinion, and this is based upon a lot of comments that I get from blog posts that I've written and people that come up to me after a conference, after a speaking engagement at a conference, and just some of those off-the-record conversations that I have, that learning and development is in a catch-up mode. When you consider the increasing velocity of business, when you consider the continuous nature of change, the continuous nature of the need to learn, and the rapid proliferation of technology into the hands of our stakeholders, as well as learning and development. We're so far behind the technology now, the training paradigm is looking, well, how do I say this without ruffling feathers? We're putting lipstick on the training pig. We're still building training solutions. Yes, it's micro learning, it's smaller. It's becoming more accessible by the use of mobile technology, but it's still training. Training doesn't drive performance, and we're still stuck in that paradigm where we are reacting to performance opportunities by building training solutions. And it's not saying that training is wrong or is incapable of contributing to performance. It's just that it may not be the only solution. Go back to that pie chart example. 18% was training, 82% was something else. And I think until we get to that point to where we can turn from the training paradigm, I mean, keep it, hold on to it, but there's a greater paradigm that wraps around that, and that's this concept of we are part of a learning and performance ecosystem, and training is a part of that. Training will always be a part of that. E-learning, boring, check the box, page turner, next. E-learning will always be a part of that. But then there are components that have nothing to do with that also impact learning and the ability to learn, the ability to recall knowledge that's lost because it's not humanly possible to keep it in your head long enough to use it through performance support technology, or diverting the learning path because someone has exhibited competency in one area, therefore they no longer need to follow that path. They can go to another path using adaptive learning. There's adaptive learning technology platforms out there that enable that to happen. But do those technology capabilities apply if all we're looking at is training? Have we done an assessment of the people, process, content, technology, measurement pieces to identify what is the learning opportunities that we have before us? And if we don't go down that path, if we default to whatever neat new authoring tool that we have, or the new learning management system that we have, or the new learning experience system that we have, what are we accomplishing if we're not tied to the point of work and the performance that we're trying to sustain in the workforce? To me, opportunities and challenges are both based upon how far behind we are on the technology that's out there. And it's the technology decisions that need to be made that cannot be made until you have identified the requirements of your learning and performance ecosystem that's unique in every organization. There's probably a dozen top performance support system vendors that are out there, and they're all very, very good. And every single one of them has a different sweet spot. Are you trying to support a process oriented learning situation that's based upon a business application like SAP or Oracle? Or are you supporting something that is very tactical and process driven that may not be associated with a business system? There's two different systems out there that would be appropriate. But if you don't understand that environment, if you haven't done what I call a readiness assessment to identify what are the business requirements around learning and performance in the organization before you start looking at technology changes, you have the cart before the horse. It's very, very easy to get wrapped around the shiny object syndrome and go buy a new learning experience system because that's the new rage. We're pushing the learning management system into the background and we're putting a learning experience system in front. Great. Which one do you need? There's probably 15 good ones that are out there, but if you haven't looked at the requirements of your environment, you could be making a mistake to where 6 months from now you're looking at your learning experience system going, geez, why do we buy this thing?
It's on the spot of what I experience in my world here in primarily Europe, is that there is a lot of amazing technology solutions and performance enhancers apps and you with the gamification and whatever the world and all the subspots that's amazing to listen to, and it is really amazing products. But I see two interesting things, and the one is actually what you're touching upon now, that once you've made the stroke of a pen decision as a manager and bought the technology, you face the fact that you have to put content into it.
And you have to maintain that content.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I can just recall from being in Bestseller, and it's not a specific one on that, but everything we did in the curriculum or content-wise, we had to translate into 15 languages. So whenever we made a change to, let's say, the service concept, imagine the workflow it took us to update everything. So I can just imagine how other companies who are facing the same things, when they face like, we've bought this performance app, we're going mobile now, we're ready to sign on all the 5,000 employees or 50,000, I don't know, but we don't have any content.
Yeah, and that's a perfect example of a concept called single source documentation, to where you have a master document that may be in whatever language you choose as your master, and making a change there would change every child document associated with that by making a single change. So it becomes a content management issue as well, and not every one of the performance systems out there excel in that area.
It's spot on, and the other twist that it's making me think about is actually also these wonderful solutions, and I really mean that from the heart. I'm impressed by almost every one of them I meet and get to talk to, but they are struggling as well, even though they have a unique product. But it's because it's a potentially unique product. They are actually, as suppliers, my experience is that many of them are struggling to actually try and have a client get the full potential out of their solution. So now they are also interested in getting closer to people who can narrow their gap, you know. So
it's funny you say that, and I would caution you, don't get me started on that. But one quick story. I mean, I've done a lot of work with electronic performance support vendors, EPSS. That is a significantly powerful technology that is having difficulty getting a foothold because they are trying to sell the product into the learning and development organization. The learning and development is still wrapped around the training paradigm. They're not looking at it from a performance perspective. And the greater audience and the greater impact is on the operational side of the business, because that's where people are compensated based upon measurable business results.
It actually brings us maybe natural to where I really wanted also this conversation to go, is to the point of work angle that you stress a lot in your sharing to the world. So can you elaborate a little bit on what is that, and how would you define that?
To me, point of work is it's ground zero. If you want to find where the challenges are, you have to go to where the work is being done and talk with the people who are doing the work and are supporting the work. So point of work could be anywhere an action is being taken. It could be a telephone lineman up a pole using an iPad. It could be a healthcare worker at the bedside using a computer on wheels, a cow, to provide patient care. It could be a customer service agent in the middle of an exchange transaction on a live call with a customer. That's where someone is about to make a decision. They're about to take an action. They're about to input something into a business application. That's the point of work. And to me, that's the most important thing to look at when there are performance issues. Who's doing the work? What is the work? What content's used? What technology are they involved with? And how am I measuring results? It all goes back to discovery that happens at the point of work.
So in terms of, you can maybe provoke the way I'm using this. I'm not using the same methodology, but maybe in a different way when I approach clients and also individual stores. I sometimes, you have a tendency to get a quick insight into what are the business opportunities, where are they challenged, and basically based on that we define the project, right? But when I actually go out to the specific individual store, I actually tend to be very much focused on, okay, we have this generic focus in our program here, in our project together, but basically what I can see we also have in this store is this issue, and we need to face that as well. How much emphasis do you put into going extremely local?
Oh, absolutely. And, I probably need to clarify, I don't necessarily ask specific people questions, process questions, content questions, and then technology questions. We're basically having a conversation just like you and I are having one here, where I'm asking open-ended questions that talk about, so what's the most difficult thing that you encounter in the course of the day? And then drill down into that. What makes that the most difficult thing? Where do you experience obstacles or roadblocks? Are you able to access what you need in time to actually be efficient or expedient in completing this transaction? Questions like that, to where different people are going to have different answers, because everyone may have a different moment of need. I can't look at the moment of need of someone who's having problems logging into the system versus somebody who is closing the system or accessing the knowledge base within the middle of a workflow, or whatever the source of their problem may be. It also points to the fact that my solutions can't be one size fits all, because the challenges are not one size fits all. And that's why it's so critical to get down to the task level workflow at the point of work to find out what's giving people problems, because you may have a couple stores that are having problems in one area that do not seem to be a problem somewhere else in another store, because maybe management has a different approach. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you start looking at solutions, it sort of overruns the ability to build a training solution, when if you're dealing with 50 stores and 48 have this problem and here's 2 that do not, or vice versa, what do you build? Am I going to build a training solution that's appropriate for some and not others? Why force people into a training environment when it really wasn't a training solution that was appropriate?
To any learning and development department working to upgrade and train their staff these years, what would be your best advice to them?
2 things. find somebody or bring the skills in and learn them associated with performance consulting. If you take a look at the 70-20-10 framework, there is a person's role called a performance detective. That's the performance consultant. That's the individual that would look at people, process, content, technology, and measurement to do digging around root causes and find out that type of information. I really think that having that skill set would be what would facilitate the second thing that I think should be a priority, and that's adopting a performance paradigm. Looking at the concept of point of work and identifying the skills necessary to identify what the gaps are at the point of work, and then building solutions that are appropriate to close those gaps. And the solutions don't automatically default to, okay, so how do we put this in Articulate? It's not a shame for a instructional designer to design a performance support tool that is a single page that's downloadable to an iPad or printable at the store level or just referred to in an electronic document. It doesn't have to be a course. We need to break away from the concept of everything is a training solution when in fact the discovery would identify for us that all this person needs is a reminder. That's not training. Maybe all they need is a communication memo that's put out from the corporate communications group. But you won't know that until you've identified what's causing the performance gap. And that takes someone with the discovery capability and the skill sets to be able to dig in and find out what's broken and why. I think the absolute best investment by any learning and development organization is to develop an internal skill set around performance consulting.
Duly noted, Gary. And for those of you listening out there, I hope that it has been equally interesting and equally inspiring to listen to Gary as much as it has been for me. Gary, thank you so much for your time and your insights. I do hope that this will be the first time we will have a talk around the performance paradigm and the revolution you're creating on that. If people want to get in contact with you within your field, how can they get a hold of you then?
Well, I'm definitely on LinkedIn. I would also suggest the blog is a good way to get a hold of me, livinginlearning.com. My contact information is on there. It's at the end of each blog as well, telephone and email. I'm also on Twitter at GDogWise, GDog as in Georgia, University of Georgia, dog, bulldog, GDogWise. And I welcome anyone who would like to dig a little deeper into this. And I would welcome anyone to visit the blog and if so moved, follow, because you'll get notified as new things are added. And thank you, Morten, for this opportunity to spew at you for an hour. Feels like I've done a lot of talking and a lot of rambling, but I've had a good time. Thank you for that.
Oh, Gary, it's all on me. Take care until we talk again, Gary.
Take care. See ya.